Okay, well, this is coming out a week late. Anyway, I don't suppose there's anything I could do about it now. Live event recap. So, this is the January 27th live event, which, considering the dates, I'm honestly kind of surprised we didn't get this. I mean, the live event was on the 27th, which I think was on Tuesday, and I'm generally surprised we didn't get this on, like, the following Wednesday or Thursday. Anyway. A few days ago, we hosted a live event on our Twitch. Update on Broken Arrows development progress. You can rewatch it here. I have not watched it. I haven't watched any of the events, including like all the way from December 9th, I think. Below, you can find a recap of what was discussed. Thanks for your continued support. The game will continue to evolve according to the roadmap and your feedback. The next live event will be held in March. Okay. And we have a slightly updated roadmap, including the DLC. So, honestly, I don't really think there's much here that's changed. I can't see anything here that's really changed. But what the team has been working on recently, what are you focusing on right now? Over the past weeks, our main focus has been on improving accessibility and engagement across different playstyles. One of the most important additions since the last roadmap update has been the Skirmish AI, including the ability to play with AI allies, not just against them. This was something we had planned for a long time, and the response has exceeded our expectations. After the patch went live, we saw a clear reversal of the player trend. Daily activity increased, and the number of players engaging skirmish mode effectively doubled. And then they have this graph here, and if I'm going to be entirely honest, I have no idea how to read this graph. So, beyond Skirmish AI, we also shipped several important supporting improvements. We updated the Victor screen to give players clearer post-match statistics through an external interface, and we made meaningful progress on network stability. Many players reported fewer visual desynchronizations and a smoother experience overall. At the moment, however, our primary focus is finalizing the first DLC, Baltic Battalion, alongside the system's unbalanced changes that will ship with it. I still think the Baltic Battalion is going to act like a framework for... Well, I say I think. I hope, at the very least, that the Baltic Battalion is going to act like a framework for, a Baltic States nation in the future. Current status of the Baltic Battalion DLC, and when can players expect the Baltic Battalion free DLC is now in its final stages of development. We cannot give an exact release date yet. One thing we want to clarify is that this DLC involves far more work than simply moving campaign units to multiplayer. I've seen people criticizing the developers about that, saying, they're just taking their campaign units and moving it to multiplayer. Some people just can't be happy for new things. Units that appear briefly in campaign missions do not require the same level of depth, polish, or flexibility as fully playable multiplayer content. For the DLC, we created more than 30 new or heavily revised 3D models, added full customization systems for all units. I'd like to point out, some of these vehicles didn't even have models. Like, when you... Hang on. Like, when you selected a unit... No. What on earth am I doing? Like, when you selected a unit in-game, you have, like, this little card or something similar down over here alongside the unit weapons. Some units didn't have that. The PZH 2000 from Peacekeepers, and to be fair, it's been months since I played Peacekeepers, so this may have changed, but the PZH 2000 didn't have that. At the same time, I also believe this thing didn't have that as well. So it's not strictly limited to Baltic Battalion units, or units that will be in Baltic Battalion. Because I'd like to point out that if you go over to... Yes. to this, which allows you to basically use the European units. A vast majority of the Baltic States, recon infantry just have the image card from Force Recon here, and most of them have the voice lines from Force Recon as well, if memory serves. Full customization systems for all units, and produced a new hand-painted portrait. Why English? Produced new hand-painted portraits. We also had to add complete voice acting support, which was not present for these units in the campaign. See my comment about them using the Force Recon voice lines. On top of that, we made a deliberate decision to have Baltic units use battle chatter in their native languages, Lithuanian, Latvian, and Estonian, which is a nice touch, I'm going to say, which requires additional coordination and community involvement. At this point, the remaining step is recording and integrating the final voice lines, after which the DLC will be ready for release. I still think the DLC is going to be coming out in like the 3rd to 4th week of February. However, considering that these things generally get delayed, I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually the 1st or 2nd week of March. Still, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. Just be patient. I think it's coming within the next 30 days is the point I'm trying to make. The next major update is Update 13, which will launch alongside the Baltic Battalion DLC. It includes balance changes, new features, network improvements, and the DLC content itself. What can players expect from Update 13? Update 13 is designed to accompany the release of the Baltic Battalion and is one of our more substantial updates since launch. A major part of it is a balance pass, and I will be doing a video on that in the same way I did for the Update 1.10 and Update 1.11. Excuse me. Videos, or the patches, I mean. I'll be doing a video for Update 13 looking at the balance changes in the same way that I did a video for the Update 1.010 and Update 1.011 updates, is what I'm trying to say. I can't think. Anyway. Major parts, balance pass, both to address existing issues and to ensure the arrival of new Baltic units does not further skew faction performance. Why don't they just use... Okay, well, I suppose nation at this point could get a little bit confusing since you're mixing Baltic and US units. At the moment, the US is statistically dominant, around 53% victory rate, which, I mean, hang on. Because, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm the only one who remembers this. At least if you jump on the Discord and see the people complaining there about USOP. I feel like I'm the only one remembering this, but 4 or 5 months ago, look at this. And this was dated, hang on, October 10th. Like 4 months ago. These things happen. You see people complaining about, oh, but the balance this, the balance that, US OP, Russia OP, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let the developers do their thing. Alright? They're going to fix it. Anyway. And, well, the thing that gets on my nerves is that you see these people and they're sort of trash talking the nation that is overperforming. And they did this back in 4 months ago when Russia was overperforming. But it's a bit annoying. I'm gonna say that it's a bit annoying. I believe I talked about someone who was complaining about the Striker RV being OP, which also I believe when I mentioned that I said that I saw it on the Steam forums. It wasn't the Steam forums, it was the Discord. It was the Discord server. And it's like, okay, so you say, but I don't think so. Or rather, it might be OP. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that it's expensive, yes, or it's high capability, yes, but it's also expensive compared to pretty much everything that Russia has. That's the point I made back then. That's the point I'm trying to make now. And if I'm going to be honest, if the U.S. is overperforming, okay, where did it say the U.S. is U.S. is statistically dominant, around 53% victory rate. Look, if they think the Striker RV, and I'm using the Striker RV purely as an example here, but if they think the Striker RV is going to overperform, or if they think it is overperforming, they're going to nerf it in update 13. And here's the thing, okay? People might be saying the Striker RV is OP. People might be saying the Striker RV is underpowered and needs a buff. Personally, I think the Striker RV is okay. Other people think it's OP. To be entirely brutally honest, it doesn't really matter what we think. Because if the developers think it's underperforming, they're going to buff it. Or if they think it's overperforming, they're going to nerf it. It doesn't matter what we think. It matters what they think and how they interpret the statistics that they have and that we don't. And we are actively adjusting systems and units to maintain competitive integrity. In parallel, Update 13 introduces several gameplay and quality of life improvements. One example is emergency airdrops, which allow players to deploy airborne units instantly instead of planning drops far in advance. We are also improving infantry management by allowing resupply while units remain inside transports and reducing unnecessary micromanagement. Other changes, such as unloading delays of stress transfer from destroyed transports to infantry, aim to improve realism and eliminate edge cases that felt unfair or unintuitive. So, I think what they mean by stress transfer from destroyed transports to infantry is that if a transport gets destroyed and the infantry bail out, they're also going to be stressed, which I have seen some people asking for and complaining about how when you blow up a transport, the infantry pops out and are able to kill your ambushing unit. Which, I guess, but generally they're saying that the infantry should just die inside the vehicle anyway. Which, ironically enough, is kind of the way helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft do it. But they're also saying here, talking about emergency airdrops, which is kind of amusing because something that other people on the Discord have been saying is that it's unfair for units in helicopters and transports to immediately die when the helicopter or transport is destroyed. Even though you can make an argument, that makes more intuitive sense than the infantry being in a vehicle automatically dying when the vehicle is destroyed. Because how are you going to leave a transport plane or a transport helicopter if it gets shot down? I mean, if the infantry in the transport plane is airborne, then sure they can parachute out. But if they're not, if say you're heli lifting some infantry, that will, like, what do you expect to happen? Anyway. The update also includes streamer safe mode, which allows streamers to hide identifying information in chat to prevent harassment. Finally, we are introducing ELO compression, not a reset, to reduce rating inflation and improve matchmaking accuracy going forward. So basically they're knocking people's ELOs down. At least from my understanding, they're bringing the ELOs down. I don't play multiplayer, and if I'm going to be entirely honest, I don't care. Like, I don't even have ELO, because the only thing I've done is I've just played against bots. Will the beta branch affect ELO or progression? No! The beta branch uses a completely separate profile. Any matches played there will not affect your main account. ELO or progression, your main account, ELO or progression. This is intentional, so players can freely test changes without risk. I don't know if a beta branch, if that's live. I haven't heard anything about it, but okay. Exploits, bugs, and fair play. We rely heavily on the community to help us identify exploits and unintended mechanics. We ask players to report these issues through proper channels rather than abusing or spreading them. Many problems persist simply because they are discussed informally and never reach us in a reproducible form. To improve this, the next update will allow players to report others directly from the end of match screen. Additionally, we are moving economy calculations fully to the server, which will permanently eliminate an entire class of economy-related exploits and cheating. This is part of our broader effort to strengthen server authority and improve fairness across the board. QA session. How effective has Easy Anti-Cheat been, and did they cause performance issues? Easy Anti-Cheat has been effective in achieving its primary goal, which was reducing cheating and helping us cross-reference data with our internal anti-cheat systems. Many cheats that were previously possible are now completely blocked, and we are detecting problematic behavior more reliably than before. That said, the initial implementation did introduce performance issues for some players, particularly freezes. Most of these issues have already been resolved in subsequent patches. In cases where problems persist, we investigate them individually, often working directly with affected players to identify hardware configuration and specific causes. Connection-related kicks can still occur if the game cannot communicate with Easy Anti-Cheat servers, which depends on external network factors beyond our direct control. In other words, if your internet sucks, you're probably going to get kicked because your internet sucks. What are your plans to improve netcode and networking? Our long-term networking strategy. Honestly, I've seen people complaining about netcode in games like Battlefield 4. I assume it's something to do with multiplayer, but I have no idea what it is. Our long-term networking strategy is to move more gameplay authority to the server. This reduces inconsistencies between clients and prevents situations where different players see conflicting outcomes. For example, events like missiles, intercepts, or explosions should be resolved definitively by the server, not interpreted differently by individual machines. I have seen some interesting videos of this where I saw one particular clip where a CRAM fires at an anti-radiation missile, intercepts it, or the CRAM's the rolling airframe missile hits it, explodes, and I think the anti-radiation missile is supposed to explode, but it doesn't, and it continues, and it kills the CRAM, which is kind of interesting. However, this approach comes with technical trade-offs. Server-side calculations increase hardware requirements and makes the game more sensitive to latency. As a result, we are moving systems to the server incrementally, evaluating the impact of each change before proceeding further. Recent patches already improved synchronization, and we will continue this process step by step. Why were save games and replays not available at launch? Save games and replays were excluded not because we didn't consider them important, but because early architectural decisions made them extremely costly to implement at the time. Adding them before release would have required a deep rework of core systems and delayed launch by at least a year. Yeah, honestly, I just give me the game. We can add this stuff later. Now that the game is live, we have much clearer data on player priorities, and it is evident that saves and replays are highly requested features. We are actively working on them, but they require significant foundational changes. Realistically, this is a multi-month effort, and we are targeting later this year. So it's still going to take them about a year to actually do it. We just have the game to, play and enjoy in that time. Honestly, the game came out June 19th last year. I would be kind of surprised if we got saves and replays before then. Are replays making progress? We know replays are one of the most requested features, and we want to be transparent about why they're taking time and where we currently stand. A proper replay system is not something that can be added in isolation. It depends heavily on how much authority the server has over the game simulation. At launch, several parts of the simulation were still handled client-side, which made implementing reliable and accurate replays impossible without major refactoring. Over the past updates, a significant amount of work has been done to progressively move more systems to be fully server authoritative. This includes combat resolution unit states and economic calculations. Replays sit at the very end of this process because they require the server to be the single source of truth for every relevant action and state change during a match. Without that, replays would desync, show incorrect information, or fail entirely. Because of this dependency, adding replays earlier would have either resulted in a broken feature or delayed the initial release by a substantial amount of time, as they mentioned earlier about it, that it would have delayed the launch of the game by a year. Instead, we chose to ship the game first and continue strengthening the underlying architecture post-launch. With each update that increases server authority, we are getting closer to a point where where a replay system becomes technically viable and stable. While we can't commit to a release date yet, replay support remains a core long-term goal and is actively tied to the ongoing networking improvements. Will PvE content continue to evolve? Yes, absolutely. We plan to continue adding PvE content regularly. The Baltic Battalion DLC includes a new mission designed specifically to showcase the new units, playable both solo and co-op. I will be making videos about that when that comes out. Players can choose which Baltic nation to play, offering multiple variations of the same scenario. Here's the thing. They say which nation to play. I saw someone point out on the Patreon that they released some images from the new DLC today, and someone pointed out that one of the SPGs in the image had a long barrel and suggested that it might have been a 52 caliber version of the M109, which I didn't think there was a 52 caliber version of the M109, but okay. Well, another person pointed out that it might have been a K9, and another person pointed out that it was a K9, which I think the South Koreans are toying around with K9 with 52 caliber gun barrel. But as the first person then pointed out, this basically gives you three 155mm artillery systems: the PZH-2000, the M109, and the K9. And this is something that the person mentioned that I agree with. That it's kind of looking like the Baltic Battalion is going to turn into the bones for a Baltic States nation, with each nation in the Baltic States having a specialization, and the units from the Baltic Battalion specialization are going to be sort of integrated into that. So, like, you have a Latvian specialization and a Lithuanian specialization, you put those two together to make a deck. It sounds like what they're doing, at least to some degree or another, is they're going to let us pick at some point whether we want to use Latvian units, Lithuanian units, or Estonian units. Now, I don't know if that's only going to be for the one scenario, or if that's literally going to be an option we're going to have in the deck builder. And if that's going to be an option we're going to have in the deck builder, this isn't necessarily one specialization, it's arguably three. And if it is an option in the deck builder, it's going to be very close to the whole idea of just making a Baltic States nation with each one of these three specializations. Or each one of the three nations having a specialization. So you have a three specialization Baltic States nation, basically. I remember I commented on some of my videos having a discussion with a person, and I speculated this about the Baltic States nation. I also speculated that you might do things like having a Scandinavian nation where you have Norway, Finland, and Sweden together as one nation with different specializations. Or you could probably do something similar with the Baltics. Anyway. Offering multiple variations of the same scenario. Our data shows that while PvE missions do not have the same long-term replay rate as multiplayer, they consistently generate engagement spikes and appeal to a dedicated portion of the community. Like me. For that reason, PvE remains an important pillar of the game. Approach to balance going forward. Balance is an ongoing process, especially in a live multiplayer game. Some issues are clear enough that we can address them directly, such as faction dominance or specific unit spam strategies. I have a nagging suspicion that I think give the BMD2 there. Other changes are more experimental and will be tested in the beta branch before being finalized. We also try to separate technical updates from balance patches wherever possible. This makes feedback clear and allows us to identify the source of new issues more effectively. Not every change is about win rates. Many are about improving usability, pacing, and the overall enjoyment. Actually, on the subject of balance, I'll come back to that because I was also in the Discord and I saw something else I would like to mention. Are there additional matchmaking modes planned? At the moment, we are focusing on 5v5 matches. Yeah, here's the thing. They mentioned this back in November, I believe, and back in December, I think. It was either November or December. Basically, the problem is that you have a pool of players. Okay, and they're probably going to say here, adding different teams. Here's the next line. Adding different team sizes risks splitting the player base and increasing queue times. Adding very different modes, such as 1 versus 1, would require entirely separate balance considerations and could dilute our focus. So basically, this goes back to what they were saying back in November or early December. You have one multiplayer mode, basically, which is 5v5. If you add, say, 2 other modes, 1v1 and 10v10. The problem is that the amount of players the game has not increased, but the number of modes that the matchmaker now has to find matches for has tripled. And you can make an argument that, but these new matchmaking modes are gonna bring more players into the game because that's what they're gonna be interested in. Okay, maybe a little, but we're probably talking about like a single-digit percentile increase. I don't think it's gonna be ridiculous. And the problem is that, as they mentioned, this is going to increase queue times because there's less people in each individual mode that queue up for a match at once. So people are still going to be waiting in queues. And they mentioned here about 1 versus 1. The thing about the game is that when you combine a specialization, or when you combine 2 specializations to make a deck, okay, what you are effectively doing is it's kind of like trade-offs. All right. Each specialization has something that they are good at, something that they are not. For example, the Armor Brigade specialization has very heavy vehicle and support focus with a decent amount of infantry and recon. At the same time, SOCOM has great infantry and recon, at least by US standards, a good amount of helicopter and aircraft focus, but absolutely nothing in the vehicle and the support tab. So you oftentimes see these two put together because they kind of help balance each other out. Each specialization has trade-offs. This is something I don't understand. When some people say certain things. Like, I've seen people claiming that SOCOM needs a 500-point support tab, and they suggest pulling like 250 points from reconnaissance and helicopter. I honestly don't think so. And the reason why I don't think so is because... There we go. Is because SOCOM is meant to have basically no tail. The idea behind SOCOM completely is that you're reliant on the logistics assets of your sister specialization or using helicopters. Back during the November 2024 beta, they did something similar with Guards Tank Battalion. Except with Guards Tank Battalion, what they did was with Guards Tank Battalion, you didn't have any logistics vehicles in that whatsoever. You didn't have any logistics vehicles. They only eventually added this thing afterwards. But the idea back in the November beta was that the Guards Tank Battalion is entirely limited to what other logistics vehicles you had in in the other specialization in the deck, which at the time basically consisted of things like this thing, and I honestly don't know what other logistics vehicles is available in this deck. Is it just this? I mean, you have some helicopters like this thing, which can carry supplies, or this thing, which can carry supplies. Or, you know, this, and you did have some transport helicopter options. That's 3,000, 4,000. Huh. And obviously, you know, you had this thing, which you could use to carry people. Anyway. Where was I? Right. The idea is that specializations have... A specialization isn't supposed to be multi-purpose. So what you do when you combine two specializations to form a deck is you can try and pick specializations so that one specialization covers the other specialization's weaknesses, or you can try and make a combination where one special, or where you're basically min-maxing. You're combining specializations to get the maximum amount of value out of certain tabs, like the vehicle tab here, or the air tab here, and the helicopter tab as well. So that's basically the way it works. The problem is that if you're doing this, your deck isn't necessarily balanced. And the idea with a 5.5 player, or a 5v5 player game mode, is that, sure, if you're running something like SOCOM Airborne, you're not going to have anything in the heavy armor category, and your support tab's going to be incredibly light as well. But because you're running SOCOM Airborne, you're going to have a lot of helicopters and aircraft. That's the trade-off. The idea is that if you are playing a 5v5 game mode, you're probably going to have another buddy who might be running, say, armored cav. And they're going to have a lot of vehicles and support points, but not a whole lot of helicopter and air points. So they're going to be able to back you up with the heavy armor that you don't have. That's the idea of, like, with a 5v5 game mode. The problem is that if you're talking only about 1v1, you run into issues where you're either trying to dilute the number of available points to cover all of your bases, or you are trying to basically min-max in one direction or another. And that's not how the game was designed. Once observer mode, so I'm assuming spectator mode, and competitive tooling are more mature, we may revisit alternative formats, but for now maintain... excuse me. I apologize. Once observer mode and competitive tooling are more mature, we may revisit alternative formats, but for now maintaining a strong unified core mode is the priority. What's the status of tournament support? Observer mode is the key missing piece for official tournaments, however you pronounce that word. Once it is implemented, we will be in a position to properly support casters, organizers, and competitive events. We are already seeing impressive community-run tournaments, including or using creative workarounds, and we will give those organizers proper tools rather than relying on improvised situations. I remember King of the Sea in World of Warships. The King of the Sea event is... Originally, it was like a fan-created, fan-organized, kind of like clan battles. Well, eventually Wargaming caught on and decided to work with the people to improve King of the Sea. But the way they were originally doing it was you had teams of... Now, a normal World of Warships team is like 12 players. And so I think the King of the Sea teams were like 11. And then you had 2 players with like tier 4 aircraft carriers. And they would ram each other at the start of the match, killing each other, which would allow them to use the free camera to view what their team is doing. And then these two spectators would be the tournament casters, or yeah, I suppose casters is the right word. Anyway, are you planning separate ELO ratings per nation? Yes, this is something we are actively considering and agree would be a meaningful improvement. Many players specialize in one nation, and switching nations at a high ELO often results in frustrating mismatched games. Separate nation ELO would allow players to experiment and learn without being unfairly punished. So, yeah, I mean, as someone who is exclusively US, I can get behind that, because if I played 300 hours worth of multiplayer doing nothing but US, but then I decided to go make a Russian deck, it's gonna suck jumping into multiplayer with the Russian deck for the first time. So I understand what they mean, and I'm happy about it. So I'm happy we have that. Or I'm happy we will be getting that. I did also want to mention 2 things that I found out. The first, and this goes back to the thing they mentioned over where they were talking about balance somewhere. Some issues are clear, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I don't know exactly where it was, but they were talking about balance. In some of the previous Patreon posts, and honestly, I'm a little bit hesitant to show the Patreon, because I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble or anything for it. Although it's only $1 a month, so it's not like a massive expenditure if anyone wants to go subscribe to it. But in one of the earlier Patreon posts where they were talking about Update 13, they said that one of the internal, or that some of the internal testing that they were doing was looking at basically curbing the prevalence of artillery. And the idea was to move the killing of units, from my understanding, away from non-combat units, presumably things like artillery, to combat units, things like tanks, IFVs, and infantry. And this made me very concerned for a couple of reasons. Firstly, killing things is kind of what is kind of what artillery does. Artillery is basically a big gun that can't see for itself. So when you're just putting along in your tank or your reconnaissance vehicle, and you see an enemy tank company over the next ridge, you might be in, I don't know, an ISV or whatnot, but you have a radio. And so you can get on that radio, you can call up a battery of 2 of M109A7s, and they can start flinging cluster munitions at the enemy tank company. Congratulations, your reconnaissance vehicle might have like a 50 cal on top, but for all intents and purposes, your reconnaissance vehicle is armed with the 50 cal and 6 155mm guns capable of flinging cluster munitions or conventional HE. That's the power of artillery. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, artillery, even on the modern battlefield, is still responsible for a vast majority of the killing. Even on the drone-saturated battlefields of Ukraine, artillery is responsible for a vast majority of the killing. It's just that drones allow the artillery to... Drones give the artillery a degree of target acquisition that you basically didn't have before. And they mentioned other things in the post, like they were looking at how they were looking at aircraft, they were looking at tanks, they were looking at infantry, they were looking at all this stuff. But the part about artillery kind of concerned me, and so did the part about aircraft. But I don't have much detail on that, so I don't think it's worth talking about. Well, one person made a comment on that post, saying something to the effect, basically what I just said, is that artillery does most of the killing, and that it's fairly realistic for artillery to do most of the killing. Now, they highlighted they said that artillery did most of the killing in the pre-drone era, and highlighted that you're probably not going to get drone warfare in-game. Now, I assume they're talking about things like small UAS like you see on the Ukrainian battlefields. And firstly, I do agree that you're probably not going to get small UAS in-game. I highly doubt you're going to get the likes of small UAS in-game. Mainly because it would completely break the way the game is played. Secondly, small UAS does not do a majority of the killing in Ukraine. That's still the realm of things like artillery and other indirect fires. So, but what I'm trying to say, well, I said what I'm trying to say. What I mean, I get their point. I get their point that they were trying to make. It's realistic for artillery to do most of the damage. As I said, drones don't do most of the killing. They do most of the spotting, so artillery can do most of the killing. Drones are powerful in the Ukrainian battlefield not because they kill things, but because they allow other things a unparalleled level of situational awareness. Anyway, I digress. The developers actually responded to this post with a very interesting example. And the example was basically that they could take a Tornado S, okay, and they could kill a bunch of your units with it. But if you manage to successfully counter battery that Tornado S, they're just going to buy it again in 6 minutes when it comes back off of cooldown, for lack of a better term, and it gets put back in the resupply pool. And I thought this was very interesting. And another thing they pointed out was basically that there's more cruise missiles and ballistic missiles than there are ground units. Or at least something to that effect. Actually, you know what? I can read this directly from the Patreon to get my point across. So let me do that. Was that it? Yes, here we go. During the test version, a comprehensive rebalancing of air defenses, anti-overkill mechanics, and aircraft timers was performed. CAS planes were reworked. The balance of cruise and ballistic missiles was revised. Significant changes were made to tank characteristics, and a separate rebalancing of transports and infantry was carried out. This should strengthen the interaction between different unit types and shift the gameplay focus towards combat units rather than non-combat methods of destroying the enemy. Accordingly, a global rebalancing of all artillery was carried out, reducing its average rate of fire per match. So, and the person commenting basically said something to the effect of, it's a very large comment. Hang on. And due to the fact I doubt we will see actual drone warfare, referring to, again, presumably things like small UAS in the Ukrainian style, I think that I like the depiction of artillery / air support / standoff weapons as the main damage dealers / force multipliers. It is how modern conflicts work, or worked pre-drone era. They have in parentheses. It still works like that. Drones aren't going to revolutionize warfare. They're just going to add another layer to it. And I think this game is one of the first to deliver this vibe. And I agree with that. Quote, it shows the importance... it shows how important intel / recon is, how important good logistics are, and that while infantry / IFE / tanks are not the star of the battlefield, but they fulfill a very important, indispensable roles with capping, defending, pushing, and gaining ground. And then they go on to say that that said, it's only a game, and obviously it's not that important. Well, unquote. After ground, unquote. And then they go on to say that it's only a game and it's not that important to stay real, and that it should be an enjoyable experience, while staying as balanced as possible. Well, the developers responded, and they basically said that the point is that in the current version there are more cruise missiles than ground units, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. And the first thing we did was work on the return timers, especially after a unit dies. And you'll note a couple updates ago they did mess with that. They also messed with the return timers when you have a unit that has expended its ammunition, like a TBM. If you refund that, you're going to it's going to take longer, if memory serves, to get it back in your deck than if you refunded it with ordnance. In the current version, I can destroy your units with a 300mm tornado, and do you know what will happen after your successful counter battery? I will buy it again in 6 minutes. Unquote. That's what the developer said. And this is interesting, because this seems to imply that what the developers want to do is to take artillery systems and make them, and to make it more punishing to actually lose them, which makes a degree of sense, all things considered. When you think about aircraft, the way aircraft timers work is that you basically get, I think it's like half the aircraft's cost in points. What is it? I think it's like hang on. U.S. Air. Where is the F-15EX? Is that the... Yes, that is the F-15EX. Okay, let me kit this out the way I normally kit this thing out. Inner fuselage. Alright, here we go. So 380 points. From my understanding, given the way the system works, if I lose this plane, the wait time is going to be 310 seconds. And the way that factors in is you have a 120-second base timer, and then half of the plane's point cost converted into seconds. So 120 seconds plus 190 seconds equals 310. 190 being half of 380. So I wonder if they're trying to convert it to something like that, but I don't know. I also, and I want to address this because there's some images floating around, supposedly of leaks, and if I'm going to be entirely honest, I am very hesitant regarding anything that has to do with leaks, because leaks are okay. I don't like talking about leaks for two reasons. Number one, it's not uncommon to hear people about faking leaked information for attention. And number two, even if the leak is real, that doesn't necessarily mean... There we go. Mouse. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that the information as presented in the leak is going to be accurate when it hits live. And I say this because it has to do with the Brutus. Now, there was a picture, supposedly, of a leaked version of the Brutus with the guided rounds without an armor package. In fact, I'm not even sure, I can't remember the image, but I'm not even sure I had the option of mounting an armor package customization. But the cost was 300 points. So, yeah. I mean, I could take 3 Brutuses without the armor package and with the guided rounds for 390 points, currently. Now, I have 2 problems with this. Firstly, that seems a little bit ridiculous. I think we can all agree. However, and secondly, what gets my attention more is that less the fact that you're talking about a Brutus firing laser-guided artillery shells for 300 points, but the guided rounds customization option was listed as only 50 points. Which means that the smoke round option, assuming that this has smoke rounds, would have been 250 points. And I think we can all agree that's just mildly dumb. Like, honestly, even if you don't think that having guided rounds, or having a squishy 3,800 meter range artillery platform with 18 guided rounds for 300 points is stupid, which I do. And then I think having a squishy 3,800 meter range artillery platform with 18 smoke rounds for 250 points is something we can all agree is just ridiculous. So, I don't think we're going to see the Brutus be 300 points when update 13 comes out. We might see artillery systems become more expensive. I don't know. Honestly, I kind of wish they didn't raise the price of artillery systems. Actually, I know I said this before in a previous video, but I think some of the Russian artillery systems could actually use a price reduction. Because the Mazda S compared to something like the M109A6 and the M109A7 is a bit dumb. And the same thing can be said for the Koalitzia compared to the M1299. Like, the M1299 is 225 points. The Koalitzia is 260. And why on earth would I take a Koalitzia over an M1299? I can make this comparison again right now. And I'm going to, because I want to make a point here. If you take the Koalitzia, okay, the base Koalitzia is the same price as the Iron Thunder. Alright. What do you have here? Aim time is exactly the same. The Koalitzia has a faster reload time. Okay. That's alright, I suppose. The Koalitzia is pretty much... Actually, it's the same speed. Okay, it gets smoke launchers. cool. I guess that can be useful, but it's only really going to be useful if it's already hit the fan. And okay, yeah, you have more ammunition, but your accuracy is lower, if memory serves. Yes, it is lower. And your range is much shorter. Okay, you have smoke rounds, which the Iron Thunder doesn't, but the Iron Thunder has 23 rounds, and all of them are laser guided. And you have that 5,000 meter range. Koalitzia, and remember, this is all the same price. You can then pay 35 points for extended range rounds on the Koalitzia, which only gets you to 4,500 meters. Doesn't improve the accuracy. You do get Krasnopol, but now this is 260 points. I'm not saying that you need to nerf the Iron Thunder. I think the Iron Thunder is generally fine as is. What I am saying is that you need to bring the price of the Koalitzia down. Maybe instead of 225 base, it's like 200 base. And then maybe like 225 with the extended range package. Because you do have more ammunition and an even faster reload time. So, do that, I guess. And again, I can make this argument with the Mazda compared to something like the M109A6 and the M109A7. And I believe I've done that in a previous video. So, I want them to see, or I want them to change artillery. I'm honestly a little bit nervous about how they do it, because I think that they could screw it up quite a lot. And, well, you see, here's the problem for me. And I know I've gone far off topic, and I'm pretty much done. I just want to explain this. But the thing for me is, when it comes to something like new changes, I think there's a certain degree of it's new, I don't like it at play about balance changes. And I know I've expressed this as well. And a prime example of that is this thing, the Slam Ram. When they changed it back in update 1.0.11, I openly said that I preferred the high-mad version of the Slam Ram. That said, I understand why they've done what they've done. And if I'm going to be entirely honest, having the Slam Ram as a shorthead system isn't necessarily a bad idea. I have said it before, and I will say it again. I still think what they should have done was taken this Slam Ram launcher, okay, which I'd like to point out was originally mounted on a Humvee. Take this launcher, put it on the Humvee that it was originally mounted on as the Slam Ram, and then put a box launcher for NASAMS on an MTV chassis, kind of like the NASAMS we get in the Baltic Battalion Specialization. I still think that's what they should have done, and I'm going to stand by that. Although it does bring up an interesting point, because if we do get a sort of Marine Corps Force 2030 specialization, which I kind of hope we do, and I know I've speculated that before, and if we get something like the JLTV as the general transport for that specialization, much like the Humvee is for the airborne infantry, are we going to get a version of the JLTV with the Slam Ram launcher in the back instead of like a cargo bed? I think that could be interesting as a shorthead system. Anyway, that's me over and done with ranting about this. So I'm still very eager for the new update to come out, and I'm probably gonna be doing a lot of videos on it. I mean, goodness knows I've been neglecting the channel for the last couple of weeks. I didn't have a Broken Arrow video to come out last Monday or last Wednesday. Destiny videos didn't come out for a couple of weeks, but that was more just scheduling issues between me and Blue, and which honestly is no big deal. I mean, Hollow Knight is coming out as scheduled, but that's because I have Hollow Knight videos scheduled out as far as like late June, as it currently stands. And I haven't even played it. I haven't played Hollow Knight in about a month. I'm gonna get my butt kicked by NKG. Anyway, I digress. So that's basically the end of this video. Still interested to see when the what update 13 is gonna hold, and I can't wait to get my hands on the multi-battalion information and just do a sort of specialization overview the same way I did with the 10 specs back when the base game specs back when the game launched. So yeah, I am very interested, and I am eagerly waiting to see what comes next.